Last year, it was our number one export, but COVID has brought tourism to its knees after our borders essentially slammed shut back in March. To put that in perspective, the number of visitors in and out of New Zealand in the second quarter of this year was down almost 98% compared to the same time last year. The sector directly employs about 230,000 people, but with no signs of the country opening up to international visitors anytime soon, what is the future for an industry that has until recently made up almost a quarter of our exports? Well, joining us now in the Auckland studio is Labour's tourism spokesperson, Kelvin, and in our Wellington studio is Todd McClay, National's tourism spokesperson. Good evening to you both.
Good.
Todd, I'm going to
Lisa.
start with you first, Todd. I just want to get an idea of where you think things are at for the industry. Are we still in survival mode or are we in recovery mode, and why do you think that?
Well, look, I think it's a combination of both, Lisa. There are tourism businesses that are in survival mode and some of them who are not sure how they're going to survive. At the same time, there are real opportunities around domestic tourism. But the problem I think we have in the very short term is around confidence and certainty. So if we look at Taupo and Rotorua as an example, two tourist destinations, they started to do much better after the initial lockdown was lifted. And largely it was visitors from Auckland for weekends and for longer. But when we had the systematic failure at the border and this virus established itself in Auckland again, and Auckland went into level 3, the door was shut and those businesses
Todd,
actually had no security at all.
We'll get to confidence in a minute. So you think a bit of both, survival and recovery. Kelvin, where do you think the industry is at right now?
Well, actually, I tend to agree with Todd. You know, there are some businesses that are doing it really tough, but also there are glimmers of hope on the horizon. We didn't expect domestic tourism to be quite as responsive as it was. So, you know, that was really positive. So, you know, we've put a lot of effort into supporting businesses. With our $400 million tourism recovery fund.
Okay, let's talk about that now. You're on the same page, it seems, in terms of where you think things are at right now. I think we'll see whether there's any divergence on how to deal with it from this point onwards. So, your $400 million tourism package, strategic assets funding. On the website, 26 businesses online have been given grants and loans. Is that all of them, or are there more to come? Have you spent it all?
No, there's more to come.
Okay.
What we tried to do with the the tourism recovery fund is to try and spread it as wide as we could to make sure we got the biggest impact. So, you know, the initial part was $17 million went to the Tourism Transitions Fund to help businesses to either pivot to the domestic market or hibernate or to explore other options.
I want to talk specifically about the money that you've given to ring-fence what you call strategic tourism assets, right? There's some concern, we've spoken to industry players, that some of the big names who have got significant assets have been given, you know, large sums of money, and they believe the decision-making process is a little confused and inconsistent. Let's look at some examples. Wellington Zoo and Zorb Rotorua. What makes them strategic assets?
Well, there were criteria, and the criteria were that they had to either have an international or a national reputation, that they would attract visitors in their own right. If they didn't exist, then there may be significant loss of spillover effects into other businesses.
So how would losing Zorb significantly diminish the value of the region that it's in? It's in Rotorua.
Well, look, it met the criteria that were established. And look, the criteria and all the applications went through a very rigorous business. They were assessed, they were peer-reviewed, they were moderated by MB. And then there was MB consulted with a number of other agencies such as Māori Tourism.
So if Wellington Zoo is a strategic asset, then why isn't Auckland Zoo a strategic asset and every other zoo in the country?
Well, it comes down to them being assessed against the criteria. Okay. And like I was saying, they were
so
peer-reviewed, moderated.
Peer-reviewed. And they put in proper applications and all the rest of it.
They put in proper applications, and but there was another layer or another 2 layers of scrutiny by other agencies such as Treasury.
I can hear Todd in the background, so let's give him a bit of a right of reply. Do you support that fund and the way it's been dished out? Would you have funded the same businesses that have been chosen, Todd?
Well, I don't know that we would have funded the same businesses, but we would have had a very open and transparent system that treated everybody equally and fairly. And your question, Lisa, about about whether, why Wellington Zoo got funding and Auckland Zoo didn't is a very good one. Maybe one of them had an extra elephant. Actually, both of them should have been assessed the same and had the same opportunity. The problem we've got is about $300 million was spent very, very quickly. Every single dollar of that has to be borrowed and paid back sometime in the future. And there's about 140 businesses around New Zealand that have been helped. Take the example of AJ Hackett. Look, good on him, he applied, but he was given $10 million to save 20 jobs. There'll be businesses down the road in Queenstown with the same, if not more, need and actually didn't get that funding and don't get to save those jobs. So I can see why the tourism sector is so
Todd, you say you want
transparency.
What would that look like? So are you saying that National, if it gave out money to tourism assets, you would put all the papers out there into the public domain and we would be able to, as taxpayers, look at the criteria and all the documentation?
Well, look, I think in every situation where you're borrowing money for the taxpayer to pay back and you're giving it to support businesses, yes, you have an obligation to do so. There'll be the odd time when there may be some privacy around that, but actually this is money that future generations are going to have to pay back. And again, good on the 140-odd businesses that got access to the $300 million, but what about the tens of thousands of others? They're not sure they're going to even get to open next week, let alone if there was another round.
Then that raises the question, Todd is saying, what about the tens of thousands of other businesses? So I assume that he's saying that National would have funded those tens of thousands of other businesses, and then what's the cost to that? So, we had to make decisions, we had to draw lines in the sand somewhere, and that's exactly what we did. So, the process was open, it is transparent, and of course there are going to be some people who didn't receive funding, so they will be upset.
Well, Lisa,
but we've always said from the outset that we couldn't save every business and every job, but we had to make decisions. Now, he said in his comments just then that this money was spent quickly. Well, he's spent the last 5 months criticising me, saying that we're not doing things fast enough. So, you can't have it both ways.
Oh, before we move on, I just want to ask you said everyone filled out proper applications. Whale Watch Kaikoura didn't, because we aid you, and they wrote a letter saying they wanted money. There's no application form and there's not the full gamut of supporting paperwork that you would have had to submit with a full application. So what happened? Yeah. Why didn't they fill out an application?
But they did meet the criteria. They're a strategic asset to that region.
They had a different assessment and you placed different requirements upon them because they didn't do what everybody else did.
So they are a strategic asset, and I think there's 180,000 visitors go there to Kaikoura every year. 100,000 visit Kaikoura Whale Watch, and so they were in danger.
Why didn't they put in the same application as everyone else? Because you've just said transparency, everyone, strict criteria, auditing, everyone was required to throw their hat into the ring with an equal playing field. They didn't fill out a form.
Yep, so we made some decisions early because there were some businesses that were going to fall over. But the thing is that we then made sure that the applications came in, that we went through those applications. They went through 2 or 3 layers of scrutiny. The Tourism Recovery Ministers in the end made the final decisions, but we had to make decisions because Todd has spoken a lot about certainty. We had to give businesses certainty whether they were in or whether they weren't out.
But Lisa, I'm not sure that does give certainty. If anything, it detracts from confidence in the tourism sector. And so what the ministers just said is that one company has written a letter and they gave them money. There'll be others in Kaikoura that have just as much need, who may not survive, who weren't treated in the same way and weren't treated fairly. So when I say we need openness and transparency, we can't have a minister saying, well, on the one case, these people didn't fill out a form, but they had need, but others did and they missed out. That's where I think the tourism sector is so unhappy.
Let's look at your policy. This proposed Tourism Accelerator Fund, you'd be picking winners as well and would have to make decisions because you've got a cap on your fund, $100 million in the kitty, which is only a quarter of what the government has put into its kitty, and you can apply for 30% of the cost of a project that would increase tourism. You're picking winners as well. It's the same thing. It's just got a different name, isn't it?
No. Well, I can give you an absolute guarantee. If somebody wrote me a letter as tourism minister, I wouldn't just accept that. If there was a round that they had to go through to apply and fill out forms and be judged properly and fairly, they will have to do that. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is we will be announcing a full round of tourism policies in the coming week. So that's only one
So what have you got? What have you got?
only
Come
one
on.
component of it. I'll just get through this. That's only one component of it. But ultimately, it's very similar to the Tourism Growth Partnership we had under the last government, where the tourism sector was able to look at innovation and ways to drive tourism, to change their businesses. It was fully assessed and decisions were made independently of the government. I would have a view that we would want an independent group of people making these decisions,
minister,
not the cabinet. And
so
finally would have to come to cabinet for sign-off, but I wouldn't want to be put in a situation that Kelvin has just said he is, where he gets a letter and decides somebody gets money because he thinks they have
sign-off is the same scenario, isn't it? If you wanted total independence, you'd give it to a committee, you'd let them decide, and that would be the end of it. So you're just proposing a similar scenario to what we've already got, aren't you?
No, but by sign-off, what I mean is that ultimately you come through the process, you have a funding round, and that comes before cabinet. What I'm saying is we won't have a situation where a minister, a group of ministers decide that after getting a letter they should give some money to somebody.
Let's crack on, because we've got a lot to get through. So just philosophically here, Kelvin, how far should government go in supporting what are essentially private commercial enterprises, businesses? How far? Where's the line?
Look, we decided that we needed to support the backbone of the tourism industry so that the borders, when they do reopen and when domestic tourism starts up, that visitors have actually got something to actually visit and go to. That was the intention, and I believe that's what we've achieved. But if we talk about the National Party's policy, it actually is $100 million over 4 years, $25 million in the first year. Now, we allocated $400 million in the last 6 months. The $25 million that they're offering is 1/16 of what we've done. I really don't know. I think it's an insult, really, to the tourism industry to say, here's $25 million. I mean, the money we gave for dock concessions in itself was
a right of reply. Are you insulting the tourism industry, Todd?
Am I? No,
yes, with your
all.
policy.
No, not at all. I mean, that was the first part of policy, and I said we'll be announcing a full raft.
Okay, well, give us a taste of them. What have you got in the toolkit?
Well, there's a couple of things there, so I'm not going to announce it today, but actually what we're doing is looking both in the short term as how we get businesses through the next period.
Okay, well, if you're not going to answer any specifics, we're going to crack on. So this sector, tourism sector, relies heavily on international tourists, like border restrictions since March 19. So what's your plan B, Todd? Lay it out for me.
Sorry, say that again, though.
What's your plan B? We've got border restrictions right now. We've had them since March 19. So we don't have people coming in, the floods of international tourists. What's your plan B for this
So there's two parts to this. There is the domestic tourism, and as I mentioned earlier, we've had the challenge of, as we have had the systematic failure of the border and restrictions come in, then those domestic tourists don't get to travel as much as we need them to, which puts pressure on tourism businesses that are already covering debt. Firstly. Secondly, I do think we need a responsible and debate around what an open border might look like. If we have a consideration of Singapore as an example, they've indicated they've come to a position where they want to welcome New Zealand visitors there. I don't believe that the border of New Zealand can be opened safely today, but what is really important for the tourism sector is the start of that conversation about what it might look like and when it might happen, so they can plan and they can see how they can get through. The second part
so
of
Todd,
this is
what level of risk in presenting that scenario where you're suggesting not throwing the gates totally open, but, opening the door a wedge, what level of risk is acceptable for you if you were the tourism minister, and what would that look like, a partially open border?
So a very low level of risk would be important. We do need to consider health. We need to make sure that the border agency that we...
So a low level of risk with health. Would you rate that in terms of the spread number for the virus, the number of cases in the community, or what's your benchmark?
No. What I was about to say is we need to ensure that the border agency has control, one, of the border, and two, that we have track and trace and the ability to get on top of any incursion very, very quickly. That's the first thing. The second thing, and Lisa, I've been on the program with you earlier this year where there was ongoing discussion about the Trans-Tasman border, and the Cook Islands, the government had announced opening up travel to the Cook Islands. So that demonstrates there are opportunities or ways that this can happen. The problem we've now got is I think the public rightly has lost confidence in the government's ability to manage this, and it's pushed any discussion out a lot further.
Okay.
So I think there will be some opportunities where visitors can come to New Zealand safely, but we need to start that conversation today. So tourism businesses who are having to talk to their bank managers about how to get through the next few years have confidence that the government is taking this seriously.
I want to get to Kelvin on this one because you raise an important issue. How can we open that border a little bit? And what work are you doing on that right now? What's your plan?
Look, so first of all, you asked Todd what his policies were, and he didn't. He just said he's going to want to have a big conversation. Our plan is to to
wait for that.
is actually being implemented. What he actually described is what we're actually doing in terms of the contact tracing. We had a resurgence plan. Unfortunately, we had to implement it, and that's what we've done.
But tourism industry wants to know when they can expect a change in the situation in the border and what that might look like and over what time period. So I'm asking you that. Have you got any papers being put together behind the scenes? What are your experts telling you about, okay, Kelvin, this is the option?
Yes.
What have you got?
So when COVID initially hit, people were asking me to stand up and speculate about when the Trans-Tasman bubble would be opened. And I didn't. I wouldn't speculate because businesses would go out and they would make business decisions about hiring staff and training staff and all those sorts of things. Now, thank goodness that we didn't speculate on timeframes because, to be honest, we were hoping it would be around about now that the Trans-Tasman bubble would have been opened. And if we'd got to the situation where we are now, after me talking about it, speculating about this time frame, businesses would have then said that we'd given mixed and confusing messages. So, if they want certainty, the last thing they need is someone standing here, a politician standing up and saying, look, I think it's going to be in 1 year,
I understand the quandary, and I think a whole lot of people do. I do understand the quandary, but how do you get around it then? Are you categorically saying that our strategy is elimination and therefore there's zero tolerance for cases in the community and any type of border operation that risks that is a no-go zone? We're shut down until there's a vaccine.
No, I'm not saying that at all. There are things that can be done in the meantime. So, for example, Tourism New Zealand, they've been charged with keeping the brand New Zealand alive in the hearts and minds of our international markets. And if you ask, what are we going to do in the future, we know that we need to invest in our international markets when the borders do look like they're going to start to open. So, there's going to be great. We've already invested the $400 million on top of the broad support that the government's given in terms of the wage subsidy and things like that. But the next thing is to actually be enticing our international visitors over.
Yes, Todd, you go.
Lisa, I'm not sure that that's quite how the business community view it nor how it works. They weren't looking for an absolute guarantee from Kelvin that the border to Australia would open today. They were asking him for some information and advice, or at least a direction that the government was working on this. So yes, they could start planning.
No, I can tell you that he's wrong. They were asking me, when is the border going to open?
The problem that you have, Kelvin, is the government has come out and it said that there is the government guaranteed loan scheme. Most tourism businesses can't get access to that at the moment because their banks won't lend them the 20% because they see them as being too risky. So if you had come out early in the year and said what you've just said now, you hope to have the border open by now under certain conditions, I think everybody would accept that it would not be responsible to open it with Australia today. What the tourism sector is asking is, number one, that there is work underway, and number two, when the government hopes this might happen, under what conditions, so they can plan. And if you don't do that, there are businesses that will close that probably don't have to.
Todd, the reality is when you're in opposition, it's easy to criticise and not have to come up with any kind of solution. So can you offer any more certainty? You can't really, can you?
Well, I think that we were starting to see certainty. We saw that there would be an opening up towards the Cook Islands. That was agreed between the two governments. That shows that it can happen. The discussion with Australia was quite advanced, and the Australian government announced that they were looking towards a trial. But things change when cases come to light. Well,
when infections in states blow up there, you have to change your plan. So the reality is you can't offer guarantees either, can you?
No. So I'm not saying there's a guarantee, and I wasn't asking the minister to give a guarantee. I was asking him to be open and talk about it more so businesses can start. But there are other things that can be done. For instance, I know that the New Zealand cruise ship industry has asked whether a cruise ship that's empty could come to New Zealand, a number of them, and New Zealanders could travel on those around the country that could be sold. They've asked the government, and so far there's been no engagement and no discussion. So what's really needed?
Okay, let's ask Kelvin about that. Would you support that? Cruise ships.
Well, first of all, what he's saying that there's been no discussion and no engagement is totally wrong. In fact, I've had personal conversations with people who have been looking at this. I've had personal conversations with people who are looking at other ways of supporting tourism and bringing tourists in. But we have to go through a process.
But is the work underway, or are you just having conversations?
The thing is that we can't actually go out and talk about this because then we raise expectation and we give off.
So Todd asked the question there: is work underway, or are you just having conversations?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into the exact details of what we're doing.
But that's what the travel agents in the sector wants to know, whether the government is taking this seriously, surely.
Well, we are taking this very seriously, and we do have conversations at a number of levels with various people. But the
Kelvin,
thing
have
is
you
I'm
sought
not going
advice
to
on
share
whether
it.
or not there is risk, and it will help the tourism sector?
I don't have to justify to Todd what we've done, because
But he's not the only one listening to this
you're not talking to
conversation,
me, you're
Kelvin.
talking
There's
to
lots of people listening, and there are people in the industry, there are people who are going to cast their votes. Let's get a couple of quick things out of the way. Todd, if you're all for certainty and tourism opportunities, will you be advocating hard with your leader for a Matariki holiday?
Yes, I will, and I do think Matariki is a good idea, and I support it. But I've got to tell you, when they announced it in Rotorua on Monday of this week and billed it as a solution to the challenges that the tourism industry is facing at the moment, it actually is not going to help at all. It's 2 years away. Kelvin, if another holiday is going to fix tourism, let's have 10 this year, please. The tourism sector needs action now.
So you would support it, and you're going to lobby George Collins for it. Or in terms of practical
I do think,
help,
though, Lisa, that we should take an existing holiday and move it over rather than another one.
Okay, well, that's a whole different story then. You've just taken away one long weekend for the tourism industry.
And that's the thing. The tourism industry actually welcomed that decision with open arms.
Okay, let's talk about...
give them time to
they might do, although
I'm jumping in here, Todd. I'm jumping in here because I want to know about practical help. So tourism industry Aotearoa, Kelvin, it wants to ditch the social distancing requirement on planes, this keeping the middle seat free, because they say they can't get capacity on plane, and school holidays are coming up and it's really making life difficult for them. Are you going to push for that to change?
Look, we have conversations in Cabinet. We've had this very conversation.
Are you pushing,
though?
Are you advocating for it, or you just listen and they decide and you vote with them?
Well, I'm not going to say the position that everybody takes in Cabinet, but we have had this discussion. We understand the concerns, but ultimately, we take our advice from, we listen to the latest advice, the latest health advice, and we take advice and make decisions based around that.
Let me put it a different way. I know there are constraints about what you can tell us about what goes on in Cabinet. Do you see your role as an advocate for this industry? And generally, do you advocate hard with your colleagues for things that would help this industry?
Well, you just need to look at all the support that has gone into the tourism industry, as well as the broad-based support that we've given. And, I'm part of the Cabinet that made those decisions, the $400 million Tourism Recovery Fund, and all the ways that we've used it to support not just the supply of tourism, but also to drive demand. $50 million in the Regional Events Fund, the over $20 million for the RTOs. So, those are the issues that we've been
early on, Kelvin?
Say again, Todd?
Did you advocate for travel agents early on, Kelvin? They had to wait 6 months to get support from the government.
Well, of course, we have the conversations. Myself and Minister Whaafoi have, the announcement was made around the $50 million, well, just under $50 million that is going to help the travel agents. So,
but I guess the point is it was only after concerted political pressure and these people waited 6 months that actually the government took it seriously. And I think what the tourism sector needs, because it is in a crisis, there are a lot of businesses that will close, is decisions that are made more quickly. Lisa, you asked Kelvin about, the tourism sector's
the middle seat one. Would you change it?
Yeah, I can be really clear on this. If the mask works and it can shown to be safe, yes, we should do it.
That's a lot of qualifiers and a lot of ifs. So
it's not,
what's your position?
I don't get to sit in the cabinet around the cabinet table and have the advice that Kelvin says he gets but won't share around health. But as a tourism minister, I would be advocating for it. It would be for health to say whether or not it's possible. But we've been told if we wear masks around the country, the risk diminishes, and therefore, as we look at what is needed for tourism, the bar for that social distancing on their airplanes, I guess, would have to be extremely high. That would be the case for the health minister to make. As tourism minister, I would be advocating.
So basically, he's saying what I said, but I've got the information. I'm privy to the information.
In the 5 minutes we've got left, I want to look forward here at opportunities. Okay, so. Is this, you talk about pivoting a bit, Kelvin, but is this an opportunity to reimagine this industry? And first off, would we look at the number of people we had coming into this country, like about 3.9 million visitors a year? Do we want that? Is it sustainable? Do we change totally how we look at this industry
Yes,
from this point onwards?
It was sustainable, although, and to give credit to the previous government, they were good at destination marketing. They weren't very good at destination management. And so what we had was rundown tourism infrastructure. We had too many people arriving at too few destinations all at the same time. And that's why we introduced our tourism strategy to make sure that we do have dispersal, that New Zealanders' lives are enhanced by tourism, that we increase productivity, that we look after our environment, both the cultural and the natural environment. So, we had a plan that was in place. Unfortunately, COVID came along, but we also responded to COVID.
So, Todd, would you want to go back to those kind of visitor numbers, almost 4 million a year?
Well, those sorts of visitor numbers are sustainable in New Zealand if we work very hard. I think we can use what's happened now as an opportunity to look more broadly at infrastructure and work closely with councils and other regions about the type of infrastructure they need to come up with a better model to fund this rather than, budget to budget. And we were in government, actually. I don't think we got it all right either. But largely...
You didn't get it all right either, did you say? Then you made some mistakes. Which were they? I don't think we got everything right either in this respect. But, of course, we were coming out of the GFC and visitors started to come and it was creating jobs and that was important at the time. If you just take Queenstown as an example, it is challenging that, before COVID, the people of Queenstown who rely upon tourism for their livelihood also knew that it wasn't, the nice place it used to be to live. And so let's look forward here, Todd. You won't tell us a single thing about the policies that you're going to announce this election around tourism, so we don't know what you're doing. Kelvin, I want to give you the opportunity. Have you got anything you want to talk about now? Any election announcements for this sector specifically?
Oh, well, look, and I've already said that we're making sure that we keep New Zealand alive in the hearts and minds of our international markets and that we know that we'll need to invest. But I just want to touch on something that Todd said because he spoke about forward planning. We introduced the international visitor levy, which he vehemently opposed, which was collecting $80 million a year.
Just another tax and you haven't spent the
was
money.
Giving us the ability to plan in advance, 5 years in advance, so that we could address the issues that we're facing in the tourism sector. I want to hear them say that they're going to chuck that international visitor levy out.
OK, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to give you each about 25 seconds. Todd, your one big new idea, game changer for tourism. You've got 20 seconds. Go.
Yeah, thank you. So the game changer for tourism, I think, in the coming year is to find ways to incentivise New Zealanders to do more and to spend more. Tourism is a vibrant industry. Up to 400,000 people were employed there. Those people need those jobs, and we need to get Kiwis out doing more and spending in the short term. Longer term, the idea must be to make sure we're an attractive destination. That conversation about how we can safely start to look to open the border is important today. Otherwise, Lisa, far too many tourism businesses that deserve to survive won't get to, and the jobs that we depend upon.
If I had a buzzer, it would go now. So, Kelvin, what is your one new big idea, game changer for tourism?
Well, it's basically increasing the productivity of the sector. We had a lot of visitors that came that didn't spend a lot and didn't actually contribute as much to New Zealand as they could have. So it's about attracting the high value visitors to New Zealand and making sure that we can get them to stay here longer and spend more and increase and improve the lives of New Zealanders at the same time.
Thank you very much, and I thank you both for joining me this evening. That was Todd McClay and Kelvin Davis.